Mic check, mic check. Grand Rising, everyone. Get some ones in the chat to make sure the volume is coming through loud and clear. Chat if you can hear. Get a mic check from you, no sellout, just to make sure everything coming back cleanly.
Mic check, 2212. 2212. Yeah, 2212. Okay. I hear it.
All right. Today we'll be going over the 24th Infantry, the Buffalo Soldiers. The link is towards the top of the chat. I'll put another one in. Give me less than a minute. All right, posted it in the chat. Grand Rising Macadon 1. Grand Rising Antonio Baptiste. Grand Rising LJ Free. Grand Rising TMH. Grand Rising. Grand Rising Grand Rising Michael Robinson. Grand Rising Flying Squirrel. Are you about ready to get started? No sellout?
Yep.
All right. And like we said again, today we're still going through the Buffalo Soldiers, and today we're going through the history of the 24th Infantry Regiment of the Buffalo Soldiers. So I guess whenever you're ready to start reading off on it, hope everybody had an enjoyable night. All right, when no seller gets settled in, I guess he'll start taking off.
Yeah. All right, let me get another mic check real quick.
Mm-hmm.
Mike, you got me?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let me turn my media down. For myself. Mic check myself. All right. Peace to the chat. All right, we're on the 24th Infantry Regiment, United States. All right. The 24th Infantry Regiment was a unit of the United States Army, active from 1869 until 1951, and again from 1995 until 2006, and was primarily made up of African American soldiers. The regiment is notable for serving their country when systematic racism was overt, and when black troops were treated as, quote, second class, end quote, due to segregation. All right, let's see, scroll down a little bit. All right, we're in the history section. All right, the 24th Infantry Regiment, one of the Buffalo Soldier regiments, was organized on 1 November 1869 from the 38th U.S. Colored Infantry Regiment, formed 24 July 1866, and the 41st U.S. Colored Infantry Regiment, formed 27 July 1866. All the enlisted soldiers were black, either veterans of the U.S. colored troops or freedmen. From its activation in 1898, the 24th Infantry served throughout the western United States. Its missions included garrisoning frontier posts, battling American Indians, protecting roadways against bandits, and guarding the border between the United States and Mexico. Spanish-American War. The year 1898 saw the 24th Infantry deployed to Cuba as part of the U.S. Expeditionary Force in the Spanish-American War. Elements of the 24th participated in the storming of the Spanish fortress in the Battle of El Caney. At the climactic Battle of San Juan Hill, under the command of Emerson L. Lipscomb, supported by intensive fire from the Gatling gun detachment, units of the 24th Infantry, accompanied by elements of the 6th and 13th Infantry Regiments, assaulted and seized the Spanish-held blockhouse and trench system atop San Juan Hill. The Vancouver Barracks. Company B arrived on April 3rd, 1899 at Vancouver Barracks, the first African-American regiment to serve as part of the garrison there. Moving to the Philippine-American War. In 1899, the regiment deployed to the Philippine Islands to help suppress a guerrilla movement in the Philippine-American War. The regiment returned to the islands in 1905 and 1911. Though the 24th fought a number of battles in the Philippines, one of the most notable occurred on 7 December 1899, when 9 soldiers from the regiment routed 100 guerrillas from their trenches. All right, moving to the Mexican border. In 1916, the 24th Infantry guarded the Mexican-United States border to keep the Mexican Revolution from spilling onto U.S. soil. When it did, the 24th joined the punitive expedition under General Pershing and entered Mexico to fight Pancho Villa's forces. In 1919, rebels and troops of the Mexican government fought in Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua, which borders the U.S. of El Paso, Texas. Which borders the U.S. city of El Paso, Texas. The 24th Infantry crossed over again to engage the rebels, ensuring that no violence erupted across the U.S. border. So, pre-World War I and the Houston Riot. So during the nadir of American race relations and just months after America's entry into World War I, the soldiers of this historic all-black unit had been dispatched to guard the construction of Camp Logan, a military facility in Harris County, where they met an animosity from local white civilians. When white police beat and arrested a black private who tried to intervene during a violent daytime arrest of a black washerwoman, the woman, Sarah Travers, and the soldier, Private Alonzo Edwards, were jailed. A black corporal sent to inquire after the private was pistol whipped, chased and shot at before being dragged out from under a bed and arrested. After untrue rumors of the corporal's murder spread to other soldiers, hostility boiled over. The Houston riot was a mutiny by 150 black soldiers of the 24th United States Infantry called the Camp Logan Riots. Sergeant Vita Henry of I Company, 3rd Battalion, led about 150 black soldiers in a 2-hour march on Houston because they had suffered racial discrimination in the city. The soldiers were met by a local policeman and a great crowd of Houston residents who had armed themselves. When the soldiers killed Captain J.W. Matz of the Illinois National Guard after mistaking him for a local policeman, the battalion fell into disarray. Sergeant Henry shot himself, distraught over having killed another serviceman. In their 2-hour march on the city, the battalion killed 15 armed whites, including 4 policemen, and seriously wounded 12 others, one of whom, a policeman, subsequently died. 4 black soldiers were killed, 2 were accidentally shot by their own men, one in camp and the other on San Felipe Street. The riot took place over one evening and resulted in the deaths of 4 soldiers and 15 civilians. The rioters were tried at 3 courts martial. 14 were executed, and 41 were given life sentences. Moving to World War II. At the start of World War II, the 24th Infantry was stationed at Fort Benning as school troops for the infantry school. They participated in the Carolina maneuvers of October through December 1941. During World War II, the 24th Infantry fought in the South Pacific Theater as a separate regiment. Deploying on 4 April 1942 from the San Francisco port of embarkation. You gonna hit me with that link right there, Bones? The regiment arrived in the New Hebrides Island on 4 May 1942. The 24th moved to Guadalcanal on 28 August 1943 and was assigned to the 14. Assigned to the 14 Corps. 1st Battalion deployed to Bougainville, attached to the 37th Infantry Division from March to May 1944 for perimeter defense duty. The regiment departed Guadalcanal on 8 December 1944 and landed on Saipan and Tinian on 19 December 1944 for garrison duty that included mopping up the remaining Japanese forces that had yet to surrender. The regiment was assigned to the Pacific Ocean Area Command on 15 March 1945, and then to the Central Pacific Base Command on 15 May 1945, and to the Western Pacific Base Command on 22 June 1945. The regiment departed Saipan and Tinian on 9 July 1945 and arrived on the Kerama Islands of Okinawa on 29 July 1945. At the end of the war, the 24th took the surrender of forces on the island of Akashima and the first formal surrender of a Japanese Imperial Army garrison. The regiment remained on Okinawa through 1946. Korean War. From the end of World War II through 1947, the 24th occupied Okinawa, Japan, after which it relocated to Gifu, Japan, if I'm pronouncing that right. On 1 February 1947, the regiment reorganized as a permanent regiment of the 25th Infantry Division. Despite the desegregation of the U.S. Armed Forces in 1948 by Executive Order 9981, the 24th Infantry remained predominantly African American, with an officer corps of both African and European Americans. In late June 1950, soon after North Korea invaded South Korea, the 24th deployed to Korea to assist in the Korean War. The 24th Infantry fought throughout the entire Korean peninsula, from the defense of the Pusan perimeter to its breakout in pursuit of communist forces when it well into North Korea to the Chinese counteroffensives and finally to UN counteroffensive that stabilized near the current demilitarized zone. The regiment received the Republic of Korea Presidential Unit citation for its defense of the Pusan perimeter. The regiment also had 3 posthumous Medal of Honor recipients: Cornelius H. Charlton, Ray E. Duke, and William Thompson. The cases of Lieutenant Leon Gilbert, court-martialed for refusing an order from the 24th commanding officer, who was white, and some other members of the 24th, helped bring greater attention to problems of segregation and discrimination within the U.S. military. The landing at Incheon by U.S. and ROK forces on 15 September finally compelled the North Koreans to withdraw from the Pusan perimeter. The 24th Infantry was divided into task forces, Blair and Corley, named for their commanders, and they, along with several from other commands, began pursuing the enemy on 27 September. The 25th Division remained in South Korea until ordered north in late November to participate in the Chongchon operation. Later in November, overwhelming assaults by Chinese troops forced the U.S. 8th Army to withdraw. On 29 November, the Chinese 40th Army flanked the 24th Infantry's line north of the Chongchon River in North Korea, forcing the neighboring 9th Regiment of the 2nd Division to withdraw. On 30 November, the 3 and 24th was at Kunu-ri on the division's open right flank with Chinese troops behind it. With the help of air support, the battalion extricated itself, losing 1 soldier killed, 30 wounded, and 109 missing. Overall, the 24th Infantry lost 1/5 of its officers and 1/3 of its enlisted men in the withdrawal across the Chongchan. Colonel Corley blamed the disarray of the 3rd Battalion on its commander, Lieutenant Colonel Melvin E. Blair, whom he summarily relieved. The 8th Army's withdrawal did not cease until the force was well below the 39th parallel north. But by early March 1951, the American and ROK troops were again ready for a full-scale offensive. On 6 March, the 25th Division advanced across the Han River. The 1 and 24th did well, moving over difficult terrain against an entrenched enemy. The 3rd Battalion initially also performed well, executing a hastily devised river crossing and advancing through rough country against well-dug-in Chinese troops far from the 1st Battalion. While climbing up steep terrain, however, the 1 and 24th reportedly collapsed under Chinese fire and withdrew in disorder. When the division commander learned of that action, his confidence in the 24th plummeted. Many soldiers of the 24th ran away from the fight, tossing their weapons and equipment aside. A derisive poem throughout the U.S. Army stated, "When the Chinese mortars begin to thud, the old Deuce 4 begin to bug." Although the 24th performed well in the attack north of the Han and the subsequent general withdrawal of the 8th Army after Chinese Spring Offensive of 1951, its reputation was somewhat tarnished, but it performed well in the Army's drive back north in May and June 1951. In August, the regiment's new commander, Colonel Thomas D. Gillis, prodded by the division commander, closely examined the 24th record in Korea. Determining that leadership had been the problem, he relieved a number of officers. After the change of command, Company F conducted a valiant bayonet and grenade charge on 15 September. But the positive performance of Company F was ignored by higher commands and the news media. By 1 October 1951, the 24th was dissolved. And that was our section on history. Got modern legacy. Let me check the chat. Let me slow it down a little bit. Peace, everybody.
Seem like every time they send them to go do something, once they're successful, they breaking them up and sending them someplace else.
LJ says, so desegregation happened, but the Buffalo Soldier units remain predominantly melanated. Sounds like a special forces team to me. Sounds like that to me too. Y'all do what y'all want to do. Just keep these white officers around you, though. See what y'all talking about. All right, let's see. We are on Modern Legacy. So the 24th Infantry was reinstituted in 1995 and assigned to the 1st Brigade, 25th Infantry Division in Fort Lewis, Washington. The regiment served in the Iraq War from 04 to 05 and 2004 to 2005 and was decorated for its service. In 2006, during a reorganization of the Army, the regiment was reflagged. However, the 1st Battalion was not included, and so it alone retains the regimental designation and carries on its legacy. It is now part of the 1st Brigade Combat Team, Stryker, 25th Infantry Division at Fort Wainwright, Alaska. Operation Iraqi Freedom. The 1st Battalion, 24th Infantry Regiment was assigned to the 1st Brigade, 25th Infantry Division, Lightning, a Stryker brigade, and served in Iraq from October 2004 to October 2005. The battalion came home with 5 Silver Stars, 31 Bronze Stars, and 181 Purple Hearts, and played a crucial role in the Battle of Mosul, 2004. During that battle, the battalion saw some of the heaviest sustained fighting of the insurgency to date. The unit was also awarded with the Valorous Unit Award as being part of the 1st Brigade 25th Infantry Division, SBCT. The unit reflagged as the 3rd Squadron, 2nd Stryker Cavalry Regiment, and moved to Vilseck, Germany. Oh, let me read that again. The unit reflagged as the 3rd Squadron, 2nd Stryker Cavalry, and moved to Vilseck, Germany. The 1st Battalion, 24th Infantry Regiment, replaced the 2nd Battalion, 1st Infantry Regiment of the now decommissioned 172nd Stryker Brigade Combat Team as of 14 December 2006. In 2008 to 2009, the 124th Infantry deployed to Diyala Governorate, Iraq, to FOB Warhouse, and later to FOB Grizzly. In contrast to their previous deployment involving the Battle of Mosul, 124 sustained very few casualties, none of which came from sustained engagement with enemy forces. For their reconstruction and humanitarian efforts during this tour, the unit was awarded the Meritorious Unit Citation, along with sister units in the 1st Brigade, 25th Infantry Division, Lightning. Operation Enduring Freedom. The 1st Battalion, 24th Infantry Regiment, deployed again under 125 SBCT to Afghanistan in support of Operation Enduring Freedom in 2011 to 2012. The battalion assumed responsibility for the Zabul province with assistance from Romanian units along Highway 1. The battalion headquarters was primarily stationed at FOB Lagman in Zabul province, with companies co-located and dispersed north and south. 124 infantry found themselves in a direct combat role again, losing several soldiers to Taliban attacks throughout their year-long deployment, including an insider attack in Kolat on 8 January 2012. I don't remember hearing nobody from the Buffalo Soldiers dying in the Enduring Freedom operation.
Me neither.
They be reporting the mess out of some people around here in these parts, passing away in certain operations, but I don't know if I ever heard any of that. But we'll keep going. Heraldry. That was Modern Legacy, but we're on heraldry now. Regiment badge. Well, just the descriptions of the... Man, that's a lot. Let me make sure. All right, yeah, I'm going to read that. So, regimental badges. Description. On a blue field, a blockhouse of masonry with tower, walls in color of gray stone, roofs yellow. On a yellow scroll, the word San Juan in blue. All encircled by a yellow band bearing the motto in blue, Semper Paratus, always prepared. Symbolism. The design commemorates the gallant service of the regiment in the Santiago campaign of 1898. Background. The badge was approved on March 27, 1920. The badge is used as a crest on the organizational colors. The breast of the eagle. Sorry, I lost my place. Where am I at? The breast of the... Where am I at? The breast of the eagle on the colors is feathered. Distinctive unit insignia. Description. A gold color metal and enamel device 1 1/4 inches in width overall, consisting of a blue disc bearing a white blockhouse with tower masoned and roofed gold below, a gold scroll inscribed San Juan in blue letters. Attached below the disc a gold scroll. The disc, a gold scroll turned blue and inscribed Semper Paratus in blue letters. Symbolism. The blue is the color associated with infantry. The house with tower depicts a blockhouse at San Juan Santiago de Cuba and commemorates the 1898 campaign service of the regiment. Background. The distinctive unit insignia was originally approved for the 24th Infantry on January 21st, 1923. It was amended to correct the motto on March 21st, 1923. Amended to add authorization for wear of the DUI on 5/7/1923. Amended to add the authorization for wear of the DUI on 9/21/1925. On 10/23/1925, it was amended to change the appearance of the DUI. The insignia was canceled and a new insignia authorized on 5/17/1927. And that was the heraldry section. Now lineage. Constituted 1866, July 28th, 1866 in regular army as the 38th Infantry Regiment. Organized on October 1, 1866, Jefferson Barracks, Missouri. Consolidated on March 15th, 1869 with the 41st Infantry and Consolidated Unit redesignated as 24th Infantry. Assigned 1947 or February 1st, 1947 to the 25th Infantry Division. Relieved August 1st, 1951 from assignment to the 25th Infantry Division. Inactivated on October 1st, 1951 in Korea. Reorganized August 16th, 1995 as a parent regiment under the U.S. Army regimental system. Redesignated 1 October 2005 as the 24th Infantry Regiment. Inactivated on 1 June 2006. Reactivated on 16 December 2006 and 1st Battalion only, and attached as an element of the 1st Brigade Combat Team Stryker, 25th Infantry Division, Fort Wayne, Wright, Alaska. And that was the lineage. Now we're moving on to the honors. Campaign participation credit. Let's get these credits rolling. Indian Wars, Comanches. Spanish-American Wars, Santiago. Philippine-American Wars, San Isidro and Luzon, 1900. World War II, the Northern Solomons and Western Pacific. Korean War, the UN Defensive, the UN Offensive, CCF Intervention, First UN Counteroffensive, CCF Spring Offensive, UN Summer-Fall Offensive. And decorations, Korean Presidential Unit Citation for Masan Chinju. Valorous Unit Award for Battle of Mosul. Meritorious Unit Citation for service during Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2008 to 2009 in Diyala Governorate. All right. And that was the honors. Moving to the famous members. Special Forces Captain Harry G. Kramer Jr. served most of his conventional career with 1st Battalion, 24th Infantry. He commanded Company B on Okinawa during the occupation of Japan and commanded Companies B and D during the Korean War. He was considered the first Vietnam casualty from 1983 to 1999 and is the first Special Forces soldiers to die in Vietnam and is the first casualty of the 1st Special Forces Group. There's your Special Forces. Free.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's all for the 24th Infantry for right now.
Yeah, I wanted to go back up and read from the Houston riots of 1917. I'm posting it in the chat now.
Gotcha.
Since it's dealing with the 24th. This is the Houston riot of 1917. I posted the link in the chat. It says Houston riot of 1917 or Camp Logan riot was a riot by 156 soldiers of the 3rd Battalion of the all-black 24th United States Infantry Regiment. After disagreements with the Houston Police Department, it took place over a single night and resulted in the deaths of 11 civilians, 5 policemen, and 4 soldiers. The rioting soldiers were tried at 3 court-martials for mutiny, 19 were executed, and 41 were sentenced to life imprisonment. Goes down to the preliminary situation. It says, shortly after the United States declared war on the German Empire in the spring of 1917, the War Department rushed to construct 2 new military installations in Harris County, Texas, Camp Logan, and Ellington Field. On July 27, 1917, the Army ordered the 3rd Battalion of the 24th United States Infantry Regiment to Houston to guard the Camp Logan construction site. The regiment traveled to Houston by train from their camp at Columbus, New Mexico, accompanied by 7 commissioned officers. It goes down to say precipitating causes. Almost from the arrival of 24 Infantry in Houston, the presence of black soldiers in the segregated Texas. The Jim Crow laws had not been enforced when the 24th was deployed in Columbus, New Mexico. But in Houston, the soldiers encountered segregated streetcars and white workers at Camp Logan, who demanded separate tanks of drinking water. Soldiers from the 24th were involved in a number of clashes with city police, several of which resulted in the soldiers receiving minor injuries. It said around noon, August 23rd, 1917, Lee Sparks and Rufus Daniels, two Houston police officers, broke up a craps game on a street corner in Houston, predominantly black San Felipe district, by firing warning shots. Sparks, searching for the fleeing suspects, entered the house of local resident Sarah Travers. He did not find the suspect, but after exchanging words with Travers, struck her and dragged her outside in her nightgown. As Sparks and Daniels called in the arrest from an area patrol box, they were approached by Private Alonzo Edwards. Edwards offered to take custody of Travers, but was pistol whipped repeatedly by Sparks and then arrested. Later that afternoon, Corporal Charles Baltimore approached Sparks and Daniels in the same neighborhood to inquire about the status of Edwards. Sparks struck Baltimore with his pistol and fired 3 shots at him as he fled into a nearby home. Sparks and Daniels pursued Baltimore, eventually finding him under a bed. They pulled him out, beat him, and placed him under arrest. It states a rumor reached the camp of the 24th that Baltimore had been shot and killed. The soldiers immediately began meeting in small groups to discuss plans to march on Houston and attack the police. An officer from the 24th retrieved the injured Baltimore from the police station. Let me reread that. An officer from the 24th retrieved the injured Baltimore from the police station, which seemed to calm the soldiers for the moment. Goes further down into the riots. Said the officers of the 24th continued to receive reports of impending trouble from the angry soldiers. Major K.S. Snow revoked all passes for the evening and ordered the guard to be increased, but later that evening stumbled upon a group of men stealing ammunition from one of the supply tents. He ordered the men to assemble without arms and warned them that it was utterly foolhardy for them to think of taking the law into their own hands. One of the men who had smuggled his rifle into the formation fired it and cried out that a mob was approaching the camp. At this point, order broke down completely and the soldiers mobbed the supply tents, grabbing rifles and ammunition. It states the soldiers began firing indiscriminately into the surrounding buildings. After several minutes of shooting, Sergeant Vidal Henry ordered the men in the area, about 150, to fill their canteens, grab extra ammunition, and fall in to march on Houston. The group marched through the neighborhoods on the outskirts of the city, firing at houses with outdoor lights. They fired on a car with 2 white occupants, but let a second car with black occupants leave unharmed. They marched nearly 2.5 miles, all the way to San Felipe district, before they encountered any police officers. Due to the disorganization of the police department, officers had only been sent out in small numbers. So the first police casualties occurred when a group of 6 officers stumbled upon the entire column of soldiers. 2 policemen, including Rufus Daniels, were killed immediately, and 1 later died of wounds he had sustained. The soldiers stopped the car carrying 2 policemen, who were disarmed and shot. A few blocks later, an open-top car carrying a man in an olive-dark uniform approached the column. Believing this to be the uniform of a Houston mounted policeman, the soldiers opened fire only to discover later that they had killed Captain Joseph W. Mattis of the Illinois National Guard. The killing of a military officer drove home the seriousness of their actions and the pending consequences. So Mattis' body was found mutilated to the point of being nearly unrecognizable. Many soldiers began to desert the group, and Sergeant Henry led the remainder on a march to return to camp. Just outside San Felipe district, Henry shook hands with the remaining soldiers and informed them that he planned to kill himself after they left. Henry's body was found in the area the next day. By the time the shooting had stopped, 17 people were dead, 4 police officers, 9 civilians, and 2 soldiers. 1 soldier and a police officer later died from wounds sustained during the riot, and 1 soldier died from wounds sustained during his capture the next day. All of the wounds received by soldiers the night of the riot were the results of accidental shootings by fellow soldiers. It goes on to state immediate aftermath. The next morning, Houston was placed under martial law. The remaining soldiers in the 24th camp were disarmed, and a house-to-house search discovered a number of soldiers hiding in the San Felipe district. Soldiers in local jails were turned over to the Army, and the 3rd Battalion was sent by rail back to New Mexico. In the ensuing court-martial, almost 200 witnesses testified over 22 days, and the transcripts of the testimony covered more than years. Author Robert V. Haynes suggested that General John Wilson Ruckman was especially anxious for the court-martial to begin. Ruckman had preferred the proceedings take place in El Paso, but eventually agreed to allow them to remain in San Antonio. Haynes posts, the decision was made to accommodate the witnesses who lived in Houston, plus the countless spectators who wanted to follow the proceedings. Ruckman urged the War Department to select a prestigious court. 3 brigadier generals were chosen, along with 7 full colonels and 3 lieutenant colonels. 8 members of the court were West Point graduates. The court contained a geographical balance between Northerners, Southerners, and Westerners. The Departmental Judge Advocate General, Colonel George Dunn, received the record of the first court-martial, known as the Nesbitt case, and improved the sentence. He forwarded the documents materials to General Ruckman on December 3rd, 6 days later. 13 of the prisoners, including Corporal Baltimore, were told that they would be hanged for murder, but they were not informed of the time or place. The court recommended clemency for Private Hudson, but General Ruckman declined to grant it. Though 169 witnesses testified for the prosecution during the 22-day court-martial, many could not identify the defendants because the riots unfolded at night during heavy rain. Historians have also questioned the veracy of witnesses' testimony, noting that the soldiers who testified as participants were granted immunity or promised leniency. Goes on the state to the first hanging. You just finna say something, no sellout?
Oh, no. I'm just reading along.
Oh,
It's good.
It says the first hanging. The condemned soldiers, 1 sergeant, 4 corporals, and 8 privates, were transferred to a barracks on December 10th. That evening, motor trucks carried new lumber for scaffolds to some bathhouses built for the soldiers at Camp Travis, near a swimming pool, and the Salado Creek. The designated place of execution was several hundred yards away. Army engineers completed their work by the light of bonfires. The 13 condemned men were awakened at 5 in the morning and brought to the gallows. They were hanged simultaneously at 7:17 a.m., 1 minute before sunrise. The place of burial was indistinguishable. Only Army officers and Court Sheriff John Taboon had been allowed to witness the execution. General Ruckman told reporters he had personally approved the death sentences and said that 41 soldiers had been given life sentences and 4 received sentences of 2.5 years or less. He said he was the one who chose the time, place for the execution. Military jurist Frederick Benyes Weiner has observed that Ruckman's approval and execution of the death sentences were entirely legal and in complete conformity with the 1916 Articles of War. It goes on to state the second and third court-martials. A second court-martial. The Washington case began 6 days later. 15 men of the Lower A Division were tried and 5 were sentenced to death. On January 2nd, 1918, Ruckman approved the sentences in a public statement, but a new rule, General Orders 116, December 29, 1917, prohibited the execution of any death sentence until the Judge Advocate General, JAG, could review the sentence. The JAG Board of Review tasked with reviewing death sentences were created by a subsequent rule, General Order 7, January 7, 1918. Those boards, though had advisory power only, were the Army's first appellate courts. While waiting for the JAG review to occur, Ruckman approved a third court-martial, the Tillman case, of 40 more soldiers. On March 26, 1918, 23 of those 40 soldiers were found guilty. 11 of the 23 were sentenced to death, and the remaining 12 to life in prison. On May 2nd, Ruckman approved the sentence. Goes on to the next part. It's Wilson's clemency and commentary. States on August 31st, 1918, President Wilson granted clemency to 10 soldiers by commuting their death sentences to life in prison. Wilson issued a rare public statement in order that the basis of his action might be a matter of record. The president's statement began by recounting the events that led to the deaths of the innocent bystanders, who were peacefully disposed civilians of the city of Houston. He noted the investigations that followed were very searching and thorough. In each of the 3 proceedings, the court was probably constituted and composed of officers of experience, sobriety of judgment. Wilson also noted extraordinary precautions were taken to ensure the fairness of the trials, and in each instance, the rights of the defendants were surrounded at every point. But the safeguards of a humane administration of the law, as a result, there were no legal errors, which had prejudged the rights of the accused. Wilson stated that he affirmed the death sentences of 6 soldiers because there was plain evidence that they deliberately engaged in shocking brutality. On the other hand, he commuted the remaining sentences because he believed the lessons of the lawless riot had already been adequately pointed. He desired that the splendid loyalty of African American soldiers be recognized and expressed, the hope that clemency would inspire them to further zeal and service to the country. Wilson, most importantly, from General Ruckman's standpoint, Wilson, a former law professor, wrote, "The actions taken by the former commander of the Southern Department were legal and justified by the record. Indeed, the president agreed that a stern redress of the rioters' wrongs was the surest protection of society against their future reoccurrence. As historian Calvin C. Smith noted in 1991, there was no proof of a conspiracy, and many of the sentences were not conclusively identified in the dark and rainy night as having even participated in the riot. On September 29, 1918, 5 more soldiers met their deaths at daybreak. 1 week later, the 6th was marched to the gallows." It just jumped on me. It says further on, Camp Logan today. The area where Camp Logan was located is now called Memorial Park. It is bordered by highways 110 and I-610. Last, it says in popular culture, the hanging of the first 13 soldiers is mentioned in part 4 of the 1979 television miniseries Roots, The Next Generations. Wow. KHOU, a CBS-affiliated TV station located in Houston, produced a documentary of the riot in 2006 entitled Mutiny on the Bayou. the Camp Logan story.
Yeah, I want to see that one. You want to look that up.
Then it says, see also 1917 in the United States, history of the African Americans in Houston. Turner W. Bell, famous black lawyer who defended some of the soldiers. His name was Turner W. Bell.
O.G. Cochran.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that only a handful had something to do with it. But then you had hundreds of witnesses all of a sudden that can point out people.
In the rain.
But where all these witnesses came from, if they was spying on anybody that was out there.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So you saying there was more Aboriginals snitching? I don't know. I don't think so. It was a dark and stormy night.
And then it's funny when you read what Wilson said, he was only given the pardon because he hoped that would encourage them to keep fighting for the U.S. military.
Pretty much. I was like, man, y'all too good to be doing this mess. Can y'all please come back? Only if I give you clemency.
Yeah, gave him life in prison to hope that, the soldiers would keep voluntarily fighting for the U.S. military. Wow.
Houston riot of 1917.
But disregard that a U.S. Military officer, multiple ones got pistol whipped.
Yeah, I know, right?
For standing up for some rights in a country that they've been risking their life for, fighting abroad for. Really? And that's, a little history on the 24th.
Yep.
It was
Found that documentary.
Not today, homie.
All right, there we go.
Checking the chat real quick.
Yep, I just posted in the back chat, not this chat, that documentary. Camp Logan riot. Matter of fact, I might as well post it in the chat. Let me stop hating. So I just posted the documentary that was on that channel for the Camp Logan riot. Nice little 46-minute and some change documentary.
All right.
Peace, everybody in the chat. Peace, Golden Moon, Ladarian Woods, LaFua Jones, Carrie Bay. Peace, what's going on? No Sellout, what up? That's me. TMH, what's going on? Copper Color Queen, Grand Rising, Macadon One, peace. Who else in here? Skip Antonio's name. Enrique, peace. There you go. All right, that's what's up. That's what's up.
Yeah, I'm finna post a link to the Philippine American War. Read a little bit more of the 24th history.
All right.
Give me less than a minute. I have it posted in the chat. I just posted it in the chat. Read a little from this, doing it actually reverse history. So the things they did before, they just decided they wasn't going to show them no type of respect. It says the Philippine-American War, also referred to as Filipino-American War, the Philippine War, the Philippine Insurrection, or the Tagalog Insurgents. Okay, it says the Filipino was DiMaggio, Filipino Americano, Spanish, Guerrilla Filipino was an armed conflict between the First Filipino Republic and the United States that lasted from February 4th to 1899 to July 2nd, 1902. While Filipino nationalists viewed the conflict as a continuation of the struggle for independence that began in 1896 with the Filipino Revolution. The U.S. government regarded it as an insurgence. The conflict arose when the First Filipino Republic objected to the terms of the Treaty of Paris, under which the United States took possession of the Philippines from Spain, ending the short Spanish-American War. Fighting erupted between forces of the United States and those of the Philippine Republic on February 4th, 1899, and what became known as the 1899 Battle of Manila. On June 2nd, 1899, the First Filipino Republic officially declared war against the United States. The war was officially ended on July 2nd, 1902, with a victory for the United States. However, some Filipino groups led by veterans of the, Katipunan, a Filipino Revolutionary Society, continued to battle the American forces for several more years. Among those leaders was General Macano Skaya, a veteran, Katipunan member who assumed the presidency of the proclaimed Tagalog Republic, formed in 1902, after the capture of President Emilio, that's a tough one.
I ain't drawing.
Nope. Emilio, other groups included the Mora peoples, who continue hostilities in the remote areas and islands until the final defeat at the Battle of Bud Bisak on June 15th, 1913. Goes on to state the war resulted in the deaths of at least 200,000 Filipino civilians, mostly due to famine and disease. There they go with that disease again. Some estimates for the total civilian death reach up to 1 million. The war, and especially the following occupation by the U.S., changed the culture of the islands, leading to the disestablishment of the Catholic Church in the Philippines as a state religion, and the introduction of English to the islands as the primary language of government, education, business, industry, and in future decades among upper-class families and educated individuals. I'm going to read this section again. It says the war resulted in the deaths of at least 200,000 Filipino civilians, mostly due to famine and disease. Some estimates for the total civilian dead reach up to 1 million. The war, and especially the following occupation by the U.S., changed the culture of the island, leading to the disestablishment of the Catholic Church in the Philippines as a state religion, and the introduction of English to the islands as the primary language of government, education, business, industry, and in future decades among upper-class families and educated individuals. Sound like colonization to me. Moving on. In 1902, the United States Congress passed the Filipino Organic Act, which provided for the creation of the Filipino Assembly to be elected by Filipino males. Women did not have the vote until after the 1937 suffrage prescribed. This act was suspended by the 1916 Jones Act, Filipino Autonomy Act, which contained the first formal and official declaration of the United States government's commitment to eventually grant independence to the Philippines. The 1934 Tidings-McDuffie Act, Filipino Independence Act created the Commonwealth of the Philippines. The following year, increasing self-governance in advance of independence and established a process towards full Filipino independence. Originally scheduled for the 1944, but interpreted and delayed by World War II, the United States grants independence in 1946, following World War II and the Japanese occupation of the Philippines through the Treaty of Manila. Hold on. They granted them their independence in 1946 following World War II and the Japanese occupation of the Philippines. So they got occupied again, man. I ain't gonna do it. Moving down. This is the Filipino Revolution. Andres Bonifacio was a warehouseman and a clerk from Manila. On July 7th, 1892, he established the Kapunan, a revolutionary organization formed to gain independence from Spanish colonial rule by armed revolt. Fighters in the Cavite province won early victories. One of the most influential and popular leaders from the Cavite was Emilio, mayor of the Cavite El Vigo, modern day, who gained control of much of eastern portion of the Cavite province. Eventually, and his faction gained control of the leadership Kapun movement. After he was elected president of the Filipino Revolution movement, the Tijaro Convention on March 22nd, 1897, had Bonifacio executed for treason. After a show trial on May 10th, 1897, he was officially considered
Hold on, I'm trying to get back to it. I lost my place again.
No, I'm trying to Aguinaldo.
What?
Well, we're gonna say he was officially considered the first president of the Philippines.
There you go. Him. You talking about him, right?
Yeah, him.
Yeah, okay.
And say by late 1897, after a succession of defeats for the revolutionary forces, the Spanish had regained control over most of the Philippines. They said him and the Spanish Governor General Fernando Primo de Rivera entered into armistice negotiations on December 4th, 1897. An agreement was reached in which the Spanish colonial government would pay 800,000 Mexican pesos, which was approximately equivalent to 400,000 United States dollars at the time in Manila, in 3 installments if he would go into exile outside of the Philippines. Oh, that's to one person. Upon receiving the first of the installments, it said, and 25 of his closest associates left their headquarters at Bato to Hong Kong. According to the terms of the agreement, before his departure, he had to denounce the Philippine Revolution, exhorted Filipino rebel combatants to disarm, and declared those who continue hostilities and waging war to be bandits. And it said, despite his denunciation, some of the revolutionaries continued their armed revolt against the Spanish colony government. According to him, the Spanish never paid the second and third installments of the agreed upon sum. After 4 months, well, they were still busting shots, so I don't think they were going to pay that, homie. That's what you get for trying to, ain't that something? Gonna take the money, leave, and tell everybody back there, y'all, man, listen, just go along with the program. It's gonna be all right. Stop busting shots. Man, moving on.
Oh, no, we good. We good, right?
Says after 4 months in exile, he decided to resume his role in the Filipino Revolution. He departed from Singapore aboard the steamship Malacca on April 27, 1898. He arrived in Hong Kong on May 1st, and the day the U.S. commanded with Commodore George Dewey's naval forces destroyed Rear Admirals
Patricio.
Montojos.
Montojo probably because it's spelled like Spanish.
Montojo, yeah. If it's Spanish, yeah, Montojo.
Yeah.
Montojo Spanish Pacific Squadron at the Battle of Manila. He deported Hong Kong aboard the USRC. What's that, McCulloch?
McCulloch.
I need to blow this up.
Yeah, McCulloch. That's the first time I've ever seen it spelled like that.
On May 17th, arriving in Quebec. On May 19th. Less than 3 months.
No, I'm gonna try his name. I think it's like Aguinaldo. I'm gonna say Aguinaldo. That's what it looked like. It's a nice Filipino name.
You're looking like an Aguinaldo. Less than 3 months after Aguinaldo's return, the Filipino Revolutionary Army had conquered nearly all of the Philippines, with the exception of Manila, which was surrounded by revolutionary forces from 12,000 strong. The Filipinos controlled the Philippines. Aguinaldo turned over 15,000 Spanish prisoners to the Americans, offering them valuable intelligence. Aguinaldo declared independence at his house in Quebec, El Bijo, on June 12, 1898. The Philippine Declaration of Independence was not recognized by either the United States or Spain. And the Spanish government ceded the Philippines to the United States in 1898. Treaty of Paris, which was signed on December 10th, 1898, in consideration for an immediate intermediate for Spanish expenses and assets lost. On January 1st, 1899, Aguinaldo was declared president of the Philippines, the only president of what would be later called the First Filipino Republic. He later organized a Congress, Mahalos and Bulacan, to draft the Constitution. They go what we talked about before. You thinking you getting your home and stuff back, and up under your nose, they reselling your land. Come on. It says on April 22nd, 1898, while in exile, Aguinaldo had a private meeting in Singapore with the United States Consul E. Spencer Pratt, after which he decided to again take up the mantle of leadership in the Filipino Revolution. According to Aguinaldo, Pratt had communicated with Commander George Dewey, commander of the Asiatic Squadron, of the United States Navy, by telegram, and passed assurance from Dewey to Aguinaldo that the United States would recognize the independence of the Philippines under the protection of the United States Navy. Pratt reportedly stated that there was no necessity for entering into a formal written agreement because the word of the admiral and the United States consul were equivalent to the official word of the United States government. With these assurances, Aguinaldo agreed to return to the Philippines. I need that in writing, y'all. Pratt later contested Aguinaldo's. Pratt later contested Aguinaldo's account of these events and denied any dealings of the political character with the leader. Admiral Dewey also refuted Aguinaldo's account, stating that he had promised nothing regarding the future. From my observation of Aguinaldo and his advisors, I decided that it would be unwise to cooperate with him or his adherents in any official manner. In short, my policy was to avoid any entangling alliance with the insurgents. While I appreciate that pending the arrival of our troops, they might be of service. We don't use you till our people get here, but we really don't care what happened to you. It says Filipino historian Teodoro Alconcillo writes of American apostasy, saying that it was the Americans who first approached Aguinaldo in Hong Kong and Singapore to persuade him to cooperate with Dewey in wresting powers from the Spanish. Conceding that Dewey may not have promised Aguinaldo American recognition and Filipino independence, Dewey had no authority to make such promise. He writes that Dewey and Aguinaldo had an informal alliance to fight a common enemy, that Dewey breached their alliance by making secret arrangements for a Spanish surrender to American forces, and that he treated Aguinaldo badly after surrender was secured. Concludes that the American attitude towards Aguinaldo showed that they came to the Philippines not as a friend, but as an enemy, masking as a friend. Sound familiar?
Man.
It says the secret agreement made by Commander Dewey and Brigadier General Wesley Merritt with newly arrived Spanish Governor General Fermin, Jardines, and with his predecessor, Velasco Augustine, was for the Spanish forces to surrender only to the Americans, not to the Filipino revolutionists. To save face, the Spanish surrender would take place after a mock battle in Manila. I'm going to say this again. To save face, the Spanish surrender would take place after a mock battle in Manila, which the Spanish would lose. Which the Spanish would lose. The Filipinos would not be allowed to enter the city on the eve of the battle. Brigadier General Thomas M. Anderson telegraphed Aguinaldo, "Do not let your troops enter Manila without the permission of the American commander. On this side of the Pasig River, you will be under fire." On August 13th, American forces captured the city of Manila from the Spanish. Before the attack on Manila, American and Filipino forces had been allies against Spain, in all but name. After the capture of Manila, Spanish and Americans were in a partnership that excluded the Filipino insurgents. Fighting between American and Filipino troops had almost broken out as the former moved in to dislodge the latter from strategic positions around Manila. On the eve of the attack, Aguinaldo had been told bluntly by the Americans that his army could not participate and would be fired upon if crossed into the city. The insurgents were infuriated at being denied triumphant entry into their own capital. But Aguinaldo bided his time. Relations continued to deteriorate. However, as it became clear to Filipinos, the Americans were in the islands to stay. Sounds familiar. It says on December 21st, 1898, President William McKinley issued a proclamation of benevolent assimilation. Major General Stephen Otis, who was appointed military governor of the Philippines at the time, delayed its publication. On January 4th, 1899, General Otis published an amended version, edited so as not to convey the meanings of the terms sovereignty, protection, and the right of cession, which were present in the original version. However, Brigadier General Marcus Miller, then in the lowly city and unaware that the altered version had been published by Otis, passed a copy of the original proclamation to a Filipino official there. The original proclamation was given by supporters to Aguinaldo, who on January 5th issued a counter proclamation. Let me pull this up. It says, "My government cannot remain indifferent in view of such a violent and aggressive seizure of a portion of its territory by a nation which adjugated to itself the title of champion of oppressed nations. Thus, it is that my government is disposed to open hostilities. If the American troops attempt to take forcible possession of the Venetian islands, I denounce these acts before the world. In the order that the consequences of mankind may pronounce its infallible verdict as to who are true oppressors of nations and the tormentors of mankind. In a revised proclamation issued the same day, Aguinaldo protested most solemnly against the intrusion of the United States government on the sovereignty of these islands. Others regard Aguinaldo's proclamation as tantamount to war, alerting his troops and strengthening observation posts. On the other hand, Aguinaldo's proclamation energized the masses with a vigorous determination to fight what was perceived as an ally turned enemy. Watching it go down. On the evening of February 4th, Private William W. Grayson, a sentry of the 1st Nebraskan Volunteer Infantry Regiment, fired the first shots of war at the corner of Sochco and Salenco Streets in Santa Mesa. Upon opening fire, Grayson killed the Filipino lieutenant and another Filipino soldier. Filipino historians maintain that the slain soldiers were unarmed. This action triggered the 1899 Battle of Manila. The following day, Filipino General Isidore Torres came through the lines under a flag of truce to deliver a message from Aguinaldo to General Oates that the fighting had begun accidentally and that Aguinaldo wished for the hostilities to cease immediately and for the establishment of a neutral zone between the two opposing forces. Oates dismissed these overtures and replied that the fighting having begun must go on to the grim end. On February 5th, General Arthur MacArthur ordered his troops to advance against Filipino troops, beginning a full-scale armed clash. The first Filipino fatality of the war was Corporal Anasco Felix of the 4th Company, Morgan Battalion under Captain Serpio Narvaez. The battalion commander was Colonel Luciano San Miguel. It says annexation of the Philippines by the United States was justified by those in the U.S. government and media. In the name of liberating and protecting the people in former Spanish colonies. It says Stuart Creighton Miller writes, American archers went to war with Spain to liberate Cubans, Puerto Ricans, and Filipinos from their tyrannical yoke. If they lingered on too long in the Philippines, it was to protect the Filipinos from European predators waiting in the wings for an American withdrawal and to the tutor of them an American-style democracy. Sound like the same thing they say now, why they can't ever leave no place. On February 11, 1899, 1 week after the first shots of the war were fired, American naval forces destroyed the city of Lano by bombardment from the U.S. Pearl Trail and USS Baltimore. The city was captured by ground forces led by Brigadier General Marcus Miller, with no losses of American lives. Months later, after finally securing Manila from the Filipino forces, American forces moved northward, engaging in combat at the brigadier and battalion level in pursuit of fleeing insurgent forces and their commanders. In response to the use of the guerrilla warfare tactics by Filipino forces, beginning in September 1899, American military strategies shifted to suppression of the resistance. Tactics became focused on the control of key areas with interment and segregation of the civilian population. Zones of protection from the guerrilla population. This is considered to foreshadow the strategic Hamlet program that the U.S. used decades later during the Vietnam War. Due to disruption of war, unsanitary conditions, many of the interned civilians died from diphtheria. General Otis gained notoriety for some of his actions in the Philippines, although his superiors in Washington had directed Otis to avoid military conflict. He did very little to prevent the breakout of war. Otis refused to accept anything but unconstitutional surrender from the Philippine army. He often made major military decisions without first consulting leadership in Washington. He acted aggressively in dealing with the Filipinos under the assumption that their resistance would collapse quickly, even after this assumption proved false. He continued to insist that the insurgent had been defeated and that the remaining casualties were caused by isolated bands of outlaws. Sound familiar? Otis was active in suppressing information about American military tactics from the media. When letters describing American atrocities reached the American media, the War Department became involved and demanded that Otis investigate their authenticity. Otis had each press clipping forwarded to the original Otis had each press clipping forwarded to the original writer's commanding officer, who would convince or force the soldier to write a retraction of the original statements. Again, Otis had each press clipping forwarded to the original writer's commanding officer, who would convince or force the soldier to write a retraction of the original statements. Says, meanwhile, Otis claimed that Filipino insurgents tortured American prisoners in fiendish fashion. During the closing months of 1899, Aguinaldo attempted to counter Otis' account by suggesting they are neutral parties. Foreign journalists or representatives of the international community of the Red Cross inspect his military operations. Otis refused, but Aguinaldo managed to smuggle 4 reporters, 2 English, 1 Canadian, and 1 Japanese into the Philippines. The correspondents returned to Manila to report that the American captives were treated more like guests than prisoners, were fed the best that the country could afford, and everything is done to gain their favor. American prisoners were offered commissions in the Filipino army, and that 3 had accepted. The story said that American prisoners were offered commissions in the Filipino army and that 3 had accepted. The 4 reporters were expelled from the Philippines as soon as their stories were printed. U.S. Naval Lieutenant J.C. Gilmore, whose release was forced by American cavalry pursuing Aguinaldo into the mountains, insisted that he had received considerable treatment and that he was no more starved than they were his captors. Otis responded to the publication of 2 articles concerning this by ordering the capture of the 2 authors and that they be investigated, therefore questioning their loyalty. When F.A. Blake of the International Committee of the Red Cross arrived at Aguinaldo's request, Otis kept him confined to Manila. Otis' staff told him about all of the violations of the international humanitarian law made by Filipino soldiers. Blake slipped away from an escort and ventured into the field. Blake never made it past American lines, but even within their territory, he saw burnt-out villages, horrible mutilated bodies with stomachs slit open, and occasionally decapitated. Blake waited to report on his findings until he returned to San Francisco, where he told one reporter that American soldiers are determined to kill every Filipino in sight. Goes on to state in the Filipino war strategy, estimates of the Filipino forces vary between 80,000 to 100,000 with tens of thousands of auxiliaries. Most of the forces were armed only with bolo knives, bows and arrows, spears, and other primitive weapons, which were vastly inferior to the guns and other weapons of the American forces. A fairly rigid caste system existed in the Philippines during the Spanish colonial era. The goal or end state sought by the First Filipino Republic was a sovereign, independent, stable nation led by an oligarch composed of members of the educated class, known as the Ilustrado class. Local chieftains, landowners, businessmen, and cabezas de barangay were the principals who controlled the local politics. The war was at its peak when Ilustrado and peasants were unified in opposition to annexation by the United States. The peasants, who represented the majority of the fighting forces, had interests different from the Ilustrado leaders and the principles of their village. Coupled with ethnic and geographic fragmentation, Aligning the interests of people from different social castes was a daunting task. The challenge for Aguinaldo and his general was to sustain unified Filipino public opposition. This was the revolutionary strategic center of gravity. The Filipino operational center of gravity was the ability to sustain its force of 100,000 irregulars in the field. The Filipino general Francisco Macbulos described the Filipinos' war aim as not to vanquish the U.S. Army, but to inflict on them constant losses. In the early stages of the war, the Filipino Revolutionary Army employed the conventional military tactics, typical of an organized armed resistance. The hope was to inflict enough American casualties to result in McKinley's defeat by William Jennings Bryan in the 1900 presidential election. They hoped that Bryant, who held strong anti-imperialistic views, would withdraw the American forces from Philippines. McKinley's election victory in 1900 was demoralizing for the insurgents. It convinced many Filipinos that the United States would not depart quickly. Coupled with a series of devastating losses on the battlefield against American forces, equipped with superior technology and training, Aguinaldo became convinced that he needed to change his approach. Beginning on September 14, 1899, Aguinaldo accepted the advice of General Giorgio del Pillo and authorized the use of guerrilla warfare tactics in subsequent military operations in Balkan. Don't this sound so familiar? Oh, 1 second, switch this. One, two. Mic check, mic check. Mic check, 1, 2. Want to make sure the sound's still coming through. Had to switch mics real quick. Can I get ones just to make sure it can still be heard? Mic check, 1, 2, 1, 2. All right. We're on the guerrilla war phase, where it states for most of the 1899, the revolutionary leadership had viewed guerrilla warfare strategically only as a tactical option of final recourse, not as a means of operation which better suited their disadvantaged situation. On November 13, 1899, Emilio Aguinaldo decreed, decreed that guerrilla war would henceforth be the strategy. This made American occupation of the Philippine archipelago all the more difficult over the next few years. During the first 4 months of the guerrilla war, the Americans had nearly 500 casualties. The Filipino army began staggering, bloody ambushes and raids, such as guerrilla victories at Catabig, Macahumbas, Pulang, Lupe, Balingiga, and Matakik, all Filipino names. At the first, it seemed that the Filipinos must be able to fight the Americans to a stalemate and force them to withdraw. President McKinley considered withdrawal when the guerrilla raids began. Goes on to state martial law. On December 20th, 1900, General Arthur McRae Jr., who had succeeded Ewell Otis as U.S. military governor on May 5th, placed the Philippines under martial law, invoking U.S. Army General Order 100. He announced that guerrilla abuses would no longer be tolerated and outlined the rights which would govern the U.S. Army's treatment of guerrillas and civilians. In particular, guerrillas who wore no uniform but present dress and shifted from civilian to military status would be held accountable. Secret communities that collected revolutionary taxes and those accepting U.S. protection in occupied towns while assisting guerrillas would be treated as war rebels or war traitors. Filipino leaders who continued to work towards Filipino independence were deported to Guam. It goes on to where it says the decline and fall of First Filipino Republic. The Filipino Army continued suffering defeats from the better armed United States Army during the conventional warfare phase, forcing Aguinaldo to continually change his base of operations throughout the course of the war. On March 23, 1901, General Frederick Funston and his troops captured Aguinaldo and Palanan, Isabela, with the help of some Filipinos called the Maccabee Scouts, after their home locale, who had joined the American side. The Americans pretended to be captives of the Scouts, who were dressed in Filipino Army uniforms. Once Funston and his captives entered Aguinaldo's camp, they immediately fell upon the guards and quickly overwhelmed them and the weary Aguinaldo. On April 1st, 1901, at the Maclacan Palace in Manila, Aguinaldo swore an oath accepting the authority of the United States over the
Mic check.
Philippines.
Mic check.
1 2. 1 2. 1 2. 1 2. 1 2.
Okay. Okay. I'm just making sure. Silent for a little while.
Hold on, give me 1 second. Got it switch something. Mic check 1 2. Mic check 1 1 2 1 2. Mic check 1 2. If everything's coming out clear out there, can we get some ones? Mic check 1 2 1 2. All right. Where we was at? It says on April. All right. for Aguinaldo swore an oath accepting the authority of the United States over the Philippines and pledging his allegiance to the American government. On April 19th, he issued a proclamation of formal surrender to the United States, telling his followers to lay down their weapons and give up the fight. Let the stream of blood cease to flow. Let there be an end to tears and desolation. Aguinaldo said, "The lessons which the war holds out and the significance of which I realized only recently leads me to the firm conviction that the complete termination of hostilities and a lasting peace are not only desirable but also absolutely essential for the well-being of the Philippines." The capture of Aguinaldo dealt a severe blow to the Filipino cause, but not as much as the Americans had hoped. General Miguel Malvar took over the leadership of the Filipino government, of what remained of it. He originally had taken a defensive stance against the Americans, but now launched an all-out offensive against the American-held towns, and was that in the Batagas region. General Vicente Lucabon and Samar and other army officers continued the war in their respective areas. General Bell recently pursued Malvar and his men, forcing the surrender of many of the Filipino soldiers. Finally, Malvar surrendered along with his sick wife and children and some of his officers. On April 16, 1902, by the end of the month, nearly 300,000 of Malvar's men had also surrendered. With the surrender of Malvar, the Filipino war effort began to dwindle even further. Got that right for you. All around the world, the same song. Remember the years, this early 1900s. It says the official end to the war. The Filipino Organic Act, approved on July 1st, 1902, ratified President McKinley's previous executive order, which had established the Second Filipino Commission. The act also stipulated that legislatures would be established, composed of a popular elected lower house, the Filipino Assembly, and the upper house consisting of the Filipino Commission. The act also provided for extending the United States Bill of Rights to Filipinos. On July 2nd, the United States Secretary of War telegraphed that since the insurrection against the United States had ended, the provisional civil governments had been established throughout most of the Philippines archipelago. The Office of Military Government was terminated on July 4th. Theodore Roosevelt, who had succeeded to the U.S. presidency after the assassination of President McKinley, proclaimed amnesty to those who had participated in the conflict. On April 9th, 2002, Filipino President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo proclaimed that the Filipino-American War had ended on April 16, 1902, with the surrender of General Miguel Malvar. She declared the centennial anniversary on that day as a national working holiday, as a special non-working holiday in the province of Batangas and in the cities of Batangas, Lippe, and Tana. It says casualties. The total number of Filipinos who died remains a matter of debate. Modern sources cite a figure of 200,000 total Filipino civilians dead, with the most losses attributed to famine and disease. Some estimates reach 1 million dead. In 1908, Manuel Raimondo in a General Geograph of the Filipino Islands wrote, the population decreased due to the wars. In the 5-year period from 1895 to 1900, since at the start of the first insurrection the population was estimated at 9 million, and at present, 1908, the inhabitants of the archipelago did not exceed 8 million in number. Romero
estimated at least 16,000 to 20,000 Filipino soldiers and 34,000 civilians were killed, with up to an additional 200,000 civilian deaths, mostly from cholera epidemic. Rudolph Romel claims that 128,000 Filipinos were killed by the U.S. and domicide. The United States Department of State states that the war resulted in the death of over 4,200 American and over 20,000 Filipino combatants, and that as many as 200,000 Filipino civilians died from violence, famine, and disease. Bob Coty noted in 2016 that the estimate of civilian deaths ranged from 200,000 to 3 million. Analyzed a number of historical sources supporting various of those estimates and detailed problems with the figures they reported. Mm-mm-mm. This don't sound familiar. Says American atrocities. Throughout the war, American soldiers and other witnesses sent letters home which described some of the atrocities committed by American forces. For example, in November 1901, the Manila correspondent of the Philadelphia Ledger wrote, the present war is no bloodless, opera buffalo engaged. Our men have been relentless, have killed to exterminate men, women, children, prisoners, and captives, active insurgents and suspected people from lads of 10 up. Dang, they were wiping out children from the age of 10 up. The idea prevailing that the Filipino as such was little better than a dog. Reports were received from soldiers returning from the Philippines that upon entering a village, American soldiers would ransack every house and church and rob the inhabitants of everything of value, while those who approached the battle line waving a flag of truce were fired upon. Some of the authors were critical of leaders such as General Oates and the overall conduct of the war. When some of these letters were published in newspapers, they would be national news, which would force the War Department to investigate. Two such letters included. It states a soldier from New York. The town of Tatalia was surrounded to us a few days ago, and two companies occupied the same. Last night one of our boys was found shot and his stomach cut open. Immediate orders were received from General Wheaton to burn the town and kill every native in sight, which was done to a finish. About 1,000 men, women, and children were reported killed. I am probably growing hard-hearted, for I am in my glory when I can sight my gun on some dark skin and pull the trigger. I'm finna read this again, so y'all can understand the importance why we're reading the Filipino War, to give you an idea on who these people are. Pick out the nuggets. A soldier from New York. The town of Tatalia was surrounded to us a few days ago, and two companies occupied the same. Last night one of our boys was found shot and his stomach cut open. Immediate orders were received from General Wheaton to burn the town and kill every native in sight, which was done to a finish. About 1,000 men, women, and children were reported killed. I am probably growing hard-hearted, for I am in my glory when I can sight my gun on some dark skin and pull the trigger.
Done to a finish.
Next letter, Corporal Sam Gills. We make everyone get into his house by 7 p.m., and we only tell a man once. If he refuses, we shoot him. We killed over 300 natives the first night. They tried to set the town on fire. If they fire a shot from the house, we burn the house down and every house near it and shoot the natives. So they are pretty quiet in town now. General Oates' investigation of the content of these letters consisted of sending a copy of them to the author's superior and having him force the author to write a retraction. When a soldier refused to do so, as Private Charles Benner of the Kansas Regiment did, he was court-martialed. In the case of Private Benninger, the charges was for writing and conveying all the publication of an article which contains willful falsehoods concerning himself and a false charge against Captain Bishop. Not all such letters that discuss atrocities were intended to criticize General Otis or American actions. Many portray U.S. actions as the result of the Filipino provocation and thus entirely justified. Following Aguinaldo's capture by the Americans on March 23, 1901, Miguel Mavera assumed command of the Filipino Revolutionary Forces. Batangas and Laguna provinces were the main focus of Mavera's forces at this point in the war, and they continued to employ guerrilla warfare tactics. Vincent Lucaban remained active as a guerrilla commander in Samar. In response to the Balanaga massacre, which wiped out a U.S. company garrison at Samar town, U.S. Brigadier General Jacob H. Smith launched a retaliatory march across Samar with the instructions. These are his instructions. I want no prisoners. I wish you to kill and burn. The more you kill, burn, the better. It will please me. I want all persons killed who are capable of bearing arms in actual hostilities against the United States. General Jacob H. Smith. And I'm going to read this again. He stated, I want no prisoners. I wish you to kill and burn. The more you kill and burn, the better. It will please me. I want all persons killed who are capable of bearing arms in actual hostilities against the United States. Signed, General Jacob H. Smith. Goes on to state, in late 1901, Brigadier General J. Franklin Bell took command of American operations in Batangas and Laguna Province. In response to Monvale's guerrilla war tactics, Bell employed counterinsurgents tactics, described by some as a scorched earth campaign, that took a heavy toll on guerrilla fighters and civilians alike. Zones of protection were established, and civilians were given identification papers and forced into concentration camps called reconstruccentos, which were surrounded by free fire zones. At the Lodge Committee, in an attempt to counter the negative reception in America to General Bell's camps, Colonel Arthur Wagner, the U.S. Army Chief Public Relations Office, insisted that the camps were to protect friendly natives from the insurgents and assure them an adequate food supply while teaching them proper sanitary standards. Wagner's assertion was undermined by a letter from a commander of one of the camps who described them as suburbs of hell. I'm finna say it again. By a letter from a commander of one of the camps who described them as suburbs of hell. Between January and April 1902, 8,350 prisoners of approximately 298,000 died. In some camps experienced mortality rates as high as 20%. Civilians became subject to a curfew, after which all persons found outside of camps without identification could be shot on sight. Men were rounded up for their questioning, tortured, and summarily executed. Methods of torture, such as water cure, were frequently employed during interrogation. And entire villages were burned and otherwise destroyed. It goes on now to say Filipino atrocities. The U.S. Army General Otis alleged that Filipino insurgents tortured American prisoners in fiendish fashion. According to Otis, many were burnt alive or placed up to their necks in anthills. He claimed others had their genitals removed and stuffed into their mouths and were then executed by suffocation or bleeding to death. It was also reported that Spanish priests were horribly mutilated before their congregations, and natives who refused to support Emilio Aguinaldo were slaughtered by the thousands. American news headlines announced the murder and raping by the fiendish Filipinos. General Fighting Joe Willer insisted that it was the Filipinos who had mutilated their own dead, murdered women and children and burnt down villages solely to discredit American soldiers. In January 1899, the New York World published a story by an anonymous writer about an American soldier, Private William Lapierre, who had allegedly been deliberately infected with leprosy. The story has no basis in fact, however, and the name leper itself is probably a pun. Stories in other newspapers describe deliberate attacks by Filipino sharpshooters upon American surgeons, chaplains, ambulances, hospitals, and wounded soldiers. An incident was described in the San Francisco Gale when the San Francisco Call that occurred in Eslantante Negros Occidental Escalante Negros Occidental, where several crewmen of a landing party from the CS Recorder were fired upon and later cut into pieces by Filipino insurgents while the insurgents were displaying a flag of truce. That name is familiar. Well, not familiar, sticks out. Escalante Negros Occidental. Other events dubbed atrocities included those attributed by the Americans to General Vincent Lucabon, the Filipino commander who allegedly masterminded the massacre in Samar province, a surprise Filipino attack that killed almost 50 American soldiers. Media reports stated that many of the bodies were mutilated. The attack itself triggered American reprisal in Samar, ordered by General Jacob Hurd Smith, who reportedly ordered his men to kill everyone over 10 years old. To his credit, Major Littleton Walter countermanded it to his own men. Smith was court-martialed for this order and found guilty in 1902, which ended his career in the U.S. Army. Waller was acquitted of killing 11 Filipino guides. It says Sergeant Harlock testified in a large committee that natives were given the water cure in order to secure information of the murder of Private O. Henry of Company, who had been not only killed but roasted and otherwise tortured to death by death insured. On the Filipino side, information regarding atrocities comes from the eyewitnesses and the participants themselves. In his history of the Filipino people, Teodoro writes that the Filipino troops could match and even exclude American brutality on some prisoners of war. Kicking, slapping, and spitting at faces were common in some cases. Ears and noses were cut off and salt applied to the wounds. In other cases, captives were burnt alive. These atrocities occurred regardless of Aguinaldo's orders and circulars concerning the good treatment of prisoners. Worcester recounts two Pacific Filipino atrocities as follows. It said a detachment marching through light found an American who had disappeared a short time before crucified, head down. His abdominal wally had been carefully opened so that his intestines might hang down in his face. Another American prisoner found on the same trip had been buried in the ground with only his head projecting. His mouth had been propped open with a stick, a trail of sugar laid in it through the forest, and a handful thrown into it. Millions of ants had done the rest. Ew. Like, wow, wow, wow. Look through the chat real quick. And on that note, there, I guess we'll close out for this Rising show, and we'll save the rest for tomorrow's Rising show because there's a whole lot more that go into detail on the Filipinos and the wars over there. So, like we say, on that note, it's always fun and entertaining when we get to kick it with the relatives. No place we'd rather be. It's always fun when we have them hard hats and shovels digging and going, digging these jewels and nuggets up of our stories. So on that note, everybody make sure you have a very blessed day. And until we link up again on the next Rising show, peace.
Peace, y'all.